Hey everyone, Tristan back with another video, and in this video I'm going to be talking headphone cables for the Sony Z1R primarily, but it's also going to serve as sort of a general video about headphone cables as well. I'm probably one of the few people on YouTube who you will see compare actual headphone cables, and I think the proof is in the pudding. You know, a lot of people say headphone cables make no difference, so it's not worth getting an upgraded headphone cable. But a lot of those same people have never actually tried different headphone cables themselves. It's just something they want to believe. And so here in this channel, you're going to hear my impressions of several different cables. Cables ranging all the way from $700 all the way to the stock cable. And like I said, you almost have to try it for yourself before you can really make the conclusion that they make a difference or they don't make a difference. And what's sort of interesting is a lot of people that say they don't make a difference either don't have a system that is resolving enough so that they would hear a difference, or maybe they don't even know what they're listening for, and their hearing isn't as sort of tuned to actually be able to perceive or hear those differences. So those are some of the factors that are at play here. I'll say right off the bat that going from the stock cable up to an upgraded cable did improve the audio for me, but I will also say at the same time that I don't think it's worth spending a lot of money on a headphone upgrade cable, especially when you get up into the several $100s. So first of all, let me talk about the cables that you're seeing here. Starting here on, well, I guess I'll start with the stock one. This right here is the stock Sony Z1R cable that just comes with the headphones. Then we'll kind of go up in the line. This is the Sony Kimber cable. So it's an upgrade cable, costs about $250. Right here we have an Audioquest Nighthawk cable, which actually does work with the Sony with an adapter. These are the little adapters here. The Nighthawk cable takes a 2.5 millimeter plug, and the Sony Z1R is a 3.5 millimeter plug, but using an adapter here on the ear side. You can use that cable. You can use any 2.5 inch, plug cable with the Sony's with the adapter. And I'll post a link in the description field for those adapters. They're only about, I don't know, $5 or something. Then in the back here, we've got the Kimber Axios cable. This is a $700 cable as configured. It goes up from there, depending on length. Then we also have the Nordost Blue Heaven cable right here. And this cable as configured in this short 3-foot length is a $400 cable. Some of these cables I purchased. Some of these are on loan to me from Mike at Hi-Fi Insider channel. So thanks, Mike, for loaning me these cables to test out. And I spent several days, testing these different cables and mainly listening tests, to see if I hear any differences. And so let me just kind of go through and tell you what I heard and what the differences are, if any. First of all, the Sony stock cable is a pretty darn good cable, although it's a little bit cheapy in build quality, as you can see. And I think build quality is probably at least 50% of the cable, build quality and looks. So if you are planning on getting an upgrade cable, it's also for looks too, and build quality, so as well as sound. So those are things to consider. But yeah, the Sony stock cable here, it's got a real cheapy plasticky vinyl covering, on it, although it does feel quite sturdy. And it works with the Sony Z1Rs because you have the screw-in, you have the connector, but then you have the screw-in connector as well to keep it locked in. Not a bad cable. Actually, it's a better cable than the prior Sony, the Z7. The stock Sony Z7 headphones cable wasn't a very good cable, whereas this one is pretty decent. I think out of all these cables, though, this is the only cable that is a silver-plated copper cable. And I generally don't tend to like silver-plated copper. I actually like copper only. All these other cables are just pure copper cables. And the reason for that is because in my experience, the copper tends to give a more sort of smooth sound signature, not as dry, not as bright on the high end, maybe not as brittle on the high end. And so that is definitely something that I heard with these cables. They sound pretty good, but it is a little bit drier and more brittle on the high end. So the first thing that I did is I bought the Sony Kimber cable. This is about a $250 cable. I'll post the link for it because you can get them on like Amazon. They're not widely mass produced, but you can find them on places like Amazon occasionally. So I went up to this cable, and the first thing that I noticed is the sound, especially in the mids, got a lot more sort of rich and smooth. The vocals, especially male vocals, didn't sound quite as breathy. They sounded a little bit more pure and clear. The dynamics were still about the same between the stock cable and this cable. It's just that this cable provided a slightly more tube-like sound, for lack of a better word. A little bit more forward mid-range, but the bass and the treble was about the same, and the sound stage was also about the same. Maybe all those things were slightly increased, but any changes are definitely subtle. So when you're talking about headphone cables, any of these cables, any changes that you're going to hear are really going to be quite subtle. And you have to have a system that's pretty good and that resolves pretty well in order to hear the differences. I was doing my main listening tests with the Chord Hugo TT, but I also tested the Chord Mojo as well with all these cables. So I think that's a pretty resolving system. And then also, of course, different headphones will respond differently to different cables. Some headphones will change their sound quite drastically when putting in different cables, and some headphones won't change as much. Some headphones, aren't as finicky with regards to headphone cables. The Sony Z1Rs do improve a bit with upgrade headphone cables, but maybe not as much as something like the Sennheiser HD800 or HD800Ss. So that's something to note as well. I also tried the Nighthawk cables. This is the older version that came with my original Nighthawks. For the purposes of this video, you might want to ignore this cable because Audioquest doesn't make this cable anymore. With the new Nighthawk headphones and the new Night Owl headphones, they include a different type of cable. But I like this cable, the original one, because it is actually what Audioquest calls a PSC plus pure copper inside, and it's actually solid wiring inside, solid copper. And Audioquest believes in the solid copper sort of cable design and methodology. And I have to say that I definitely do hear an improvement with that. It provides a smoother sound, very much like this braided copper Kimber cable, but in a sort of a thinner, package, or a thinner cable, I guess I would say, in terms of the lightness of it and the form factor. But it sounds quite good. I would have to say that the Audioquest cable to me sounds equivalent to the Sony Kimber cable. When Audioquest sold this, I think they sold it for about $100 or something like that. The Sony Kimber cable is like $250 or so. So that proves to me, at least for my ears, that the solid copper cable does make a difference in terms of having a nice smooth sound signature, and not the least bit harsh or anything like that. So then moving up the line here, we have these two headphones. I think are sort of comparable in sound quality. Again, the Kimber Axios cable starts at $700, and the Nordost Blue Heaven cable starts at $400. Moving up to these cables, one of the things I noticed is a perceived increase in highs, but that also gave me a perceived increase in sort of brittleness too, and dryness, especially in the vocals. So with these two cables, I did hear a little bit more breathiness in the vocals, but not quite as a warm tone, not as mids forward. Maybe slightly more dynamics on the high end as well as the low end, both the bass as well as treble, but only subtly so. And to me, I am someone who really listens to those mids. I really like those smooth mids, almost a tube-like sound. And so with these cables, in some respects, they actually made the sound worse in some respects. So it just depends on kind of like what you like and what your sound listening preferences are. But some people might perceive these cables as being like more revealing of details or more resolving. I didn't necessarily perceive them that way, because with these other cables, I could still hear all the details, and I could still hear the sound stage and the space if I was listening to a live recording, the room that it was recorded in and stuff like that. So like these other cables didn't have any lack of detail or anything. It's just that these seem to accentuate the details, especially up in the highs, a little bit more. So Out of these two cables, I would say the Nordost Blue Heaven is a little bit brighter leaning than the Kimber Axios cable, but they are pretty close, I have to say. Now, in terms of build quality, my favorite cable out of all of these, probably in terms of looks and build quality, I would have to say I would have to give it to the Kimber Axios cable. This is just a really cool looking cable. It's got the wood connector housings here, as you can see, both on the amplifier side as well as on the ear cup side. Also, for the Sonys, it does have the screw-in connector as well, so it supports that on the Sony Z1Rs or the Sony Z7s, and it just looks really cool too. In this price point, the Nordost Blue Heaven cable, as you can see here, doesn't really look like anything special. Just kind of looks like a cheap build quality or something. Nothing that special in terms of the way that it looks. I will say, however, that the Nordost Blue Heaven has virtually no microphonics, and microphonics are when you tap the cable, if you hear the vibrations in your headphones. Whereas the Kimber Axios was one of the worst cables for microphonics. When I tap this and I have them plugged in, I can really hear the taps. It really transmits that vibration up through the headphone wire. And I think that's because of the fine braid that this cable has. It's a very fine braid, so I think that leads to some microphonics with this. Microphonics on the Sony Kimber cable is a lot less, although it's still a little bit there, not as bad as the Axios. Now you might be asking, well, what's the difference between the Sony Kimber cable and the Kimber Axios cable? The Sony Kimber cable is actually made in China. It does have Kimber cable. So Kimber supplied the cable to Sony, I believe, and Sony manufactured it themselves in China, to Kimber's specifications. So it's kind of a joint partnership between Sony and Kimber. So it is definitely a cheaper cable. Again, this is like $250. This one starts at $700. The Kimber Axios cable is built in Ogden, Utah, pretty much largely handmade, hand-built or hand-put together in Ogden, Utah in the USA. So those are the main differences there. For my money, though, I think my favorite cable is the Sony Kimber cable. I think it looks really cool, and for the price, it performs in some ways better than the more expensive cables. To me, this cable sounds the best out of pretty much all these cables here, except the Audioquest Nighthawk cable. To me, sounds the same as the Kimber cable. They're very, very close in terms of sound, although I like the look, feel, and build quality of the Sony Kimber cable a lot better than the Audioquest Nighthawk cable. The other thing is the fact that the Audioquest Nighthawk cable is a solid wire. It's very brittle, and you have to be really careful, like not to bend it, too taut or anything like that, because you could actually end up breaking it because it's a solid cable. Whereas this cable here, it's a braided cable. And it's multi-stranded and all that kind of stuff, so it's actually a little bit more durable, and I think it just looks really cool for the price. So in all, I have to say that any differences heard with changing out a headphone cable are definitely subtle, especially with these headphones. Again, some other headphones may provide a more of a drastic change when you swap out their headphone cable, such as the Sennheisers, but with the Sony Z1Rs, there are differences, and I definitely heard them. So it's not like there are no differences. There is definitely a difference. It's just that you have to be kind of tuned in to really be able to hear those differences. But the differences are real, and the differences are definitely there. So for me, this test has been quite instructive because it just sort of confirmed what I already suspected, that headphone cables do make a difference, and especially like the different materials or different cable designs actually do impact the audio quality and the sound. And also, although the differences between all these cables shown here in this video are subtle, I think if you have like a really crappy cable, say a cable that you just got from some guy who made one in their garage, like from eBay or something. By the way, I totally recommend you do not buy a cable off eBay. A lot of those sellers are just people who don't know what they're doing, and like I said, who just made the cable in their garage. But anyway, if you get one of those cables that's like totally crappy, and then you swap in one of these cables, yeah, the difference is going to be more like night and day. But for the sake of this video, I'm comparing all cables that are fairly good, and none of these I would say like are crappy cables. So the differences are going to be a lot more subtle, but nevertheless they are there. I did hear the differences, using the same source, the same headphones, same listening conditions, and all that kind of stuff. and just swapping out the cables. The differences to me were quite clear. So anyway, wanted to do this video and talk about the different headphone cables. As always, see the description field for pricing and availability on some of this stuff. And for community and discussion, please see the comments field. And thanks for watching this video, and be sure to subscribe for more videos in the near future. See ya.